They found his teeth before they found his name. A rusted barrel, bloated with river mud, surfaced on the Neponset. Inside, a decaying man's grin still bit down on metal wire. South Boston knew that silence had a price. This was a warning, not a mystery. The cops fumbled at first, but the streets already whispered it. Whitey was back. Not the ghost from the files, not the fugitive from the headlines. He had returned, and with him came the old hunger, sharper and meaner than ever. The man who once ruled with ice in his veins now crept through alleyways with death in his shadow. A witness went missing. A corpse turned up in a freezer truck. No one spoke. No one dared. But somewhere in the dark an old friend whispered, "We buried him once, but the devil never stayed down here." The hunt wasn't just for a killer. It was for a legend who had learned how to vanish and how to haunt. Before he was a ghost, Whitey Bulger was just a boy from the projects with ice in his stare and hunger in his gut. Southie was a war zone of poverty, Irish pride and corner fights. His mother prayed while his fists did the talking. By 12, he was stealing cars. By 14, he was feared. But there was something deeper than rage, an eerie calm, a calculating fire. The neighborhood watched him climb with dread. His brothers stayed clean, Billy chased politics. But Whitey? He learned the streets had only two gods, silence and violence. The world outside saw a rough kid. But South Boston knew. They were watching a king being born, one body at a time. Even the cops whispered his name before he earned it. Because James Joseph Bulger didn't rise to power. He bent it toward him, slow as a knife to the throat. Prison didn't break Whitey, it sharpened him. Alcatraz, Atlanta, Leavenworth, he didn't just serve time, he studied it. Every guard, every inmate, every betrayal was a lesson. He volunteered for LSD trials not for freedom, but for insight. And a deal, not for Whitey. Where you know wow, there's out a pound pay. When he got out, he wasn't angry. He was evolved. He knew how power moved. He knew who feared it, who traded it, and how to take it. The old Southie kid was gone. In his place stood a man who could look into your eyes and see how you'd die. They called him Jimmy on the street. But now, the underworld knew. The Winter Hill Gang had a new warlord, and he was as brilliant as he was brutal. He returned to Boston like a ghost with unfinished business. The Winter Hill Gang was fracturing, but Whitey didn't ask for loyalty, he demanded silence. In a smoke-choked back room, he laid out his plan. No more chaos, just fear so sharp it silenced room. He made deals with the Italians, killed those who doubted. Soon nobody doubted. He controlled rackets, drugs, loan sharks, without raising his voice. His eyes did the killing. Bodies started showing up in canals, in basements, in barrels. But there were no witnesses. He didn't need an army. Just a whisper. He became Boston's Shadow King, unseen, untouched, unforgettable. But power has its price, and Whitey paid it in blood. A boy he'd once protected was found, strung up under the Zachem Bridge. No warning, just a message. Whitey didn't blink. He visited the boy's mother, kissed her cheek, and promised justice. That night, 3 men disappeared. The next morning, one of their heads turned up in a church parking lot. He wasn't a man anymore. He was myth and punishment. Southie no longer asked questions. They watched their kids walk home faster. The city press dared to name him once. The reporter's house burned down. And somewhere in the smoke, a man whispered, "The devil lives in Boston. He just learned how to smile." Long before he wore shadows like armor, James Whitey Bulger was just another Southie kid with too much fire and not enough place to burn. He was the second of 6 children in a cramped, brick-faced row house. His father lost his arm in a factory accident. His mother scrubbed floors to feed them. There were nights without heat, days without answers. But Whitey didn't cry. He watched. He watched how the men with suits laughed while the poor men fought. He learned quick, this world didn't reward good hearts. It rewarded fear. He ran with street gangs by 10, robbed stores by 12. He was baptized in blood and survival. And through it all, his younger brother Billy watched silently, promising himself he'd rise a different way. Same roots, opposite branches. But that house, that cold house in South Boston, grew two kings, one in the State House, the other in the street. At school, Whitey was a ghost, present but unreachable. He sat in the back, eyes locked on the window, fingers twitching with unspent fury. Teachers gave up. Principals made calls. But his mother, Jane, never stopped believing. "You're better than this," she'd whisper every night. But the streets were louder than her lullabies. They told him he was born to rule, not follow. The gang life didn't recruit him, he created it. By 13, he led a pack of boys known only as the Shamrocks. They didn't just steal, they sent messages. He wasn't reckless, he was strategic. Each broken window had a reason, each bruised jaw a lesson. Southie didn't raise criminals, it bred tacticians. And Whitey was already becoming a master of fear, knowing exactly how long to stare before someone looked away. The first time he tasted jail, it was just a juvenile hall holding cell. But to Whitey, it felt like a prophecy. The metal bars, the clank of doors, the silence after lights out. It all told him one thing: power was currency, and weakness got you buried. He didn't fight to survive in there. He adapted. He studied the guards, the routines, the pecking order. He learned when to speak and when to strike. When a bigger inmate tried to test him, Whitey didn't throw the first punch. He whispered a threat so specific, so cold, that the older boy never looked him in the eye again. It wasn't about violence, it was about control. And the guards? They started to fear the kid more than the men. They called him Ice Jimmy. He wasn't out for justice. He was out for dominance. Billy Bulger walked a different road, but the same pain lit his path. While Whitey ruled the corners, Billy sharpened his mind. Books became his weapons, debate his armor. He rose fast. Boston Latin, Boston College, then the state senate. But shadows followed him. At campaign dinners, people whispered the name, Whitey. Billy never flinched. He wasn't his brother's keeper, but he was his brother's mirror. Some said he protected him. Others said he condemned him in silence. But both men climbed. One made laws. The other broke them. And in some twisted way, they kept each other in balance. A brother in politics. A brother in blood. Together they were untouchable, until the scales tipped and all hell followed. One Thanksgiving, before the blood spilled too deep, the Bulger family sat together like nothing was broken. A turkey on the table, mashed potatoes passed hand to hand, laughter forced between silences. Whitey cracked jokes, Billy listened. Their mother smiled like the world hadn't fractured. But beneath the table, Whitey's pistol brushed his knee. Outside, 2 Winter Hill associates waited in a car, engines idling. It was peace, but only for an hour. That dinner was the last photo of the family together. After that, they became headlines, transcripts, surveillance tapes. But for one night, in a cramped kitchen lit by warm yellow light, they were just a mother and her sons. And even the devil, for a moment, bowed his head in prayer. Whitey didn't just take over Southie, he devoured it. The Winter Hill gang was crumbling under sloppy leadership and petty greed. So Whitey offered something no one else could: discipline. Order wrapped in fear. He cleaned house with blood and cold logic. The old crew was either buried or silenced. He didn't yell. He whispered commands, and people vanished. He moved drugs through bars, extorted businesses without leaving fingerprints. The cops watched but couldn't touch him. No one testified. No one lived long enough. He bought loyalty with terror and built an empire brick by brick. To the city he was untouchable. To the underworld he was inevitable. "You don't meet Whitey," one dealer said. "You hear the door open. You pray it's not him." Then came the deal with the devil. FBI agent John Connolly, raised just blocks from Whitey, came knocking, not with cuffs, but with an offer. "Give us the Italians, we'll give you the streets." It wasn't betrayal. It was strategy. Nice. Whitey became an informant, not out of fear, but ambition. He fed the feds just enough blood to keep their hands busy, while he tightened his grip on Boston. Connolly protected him, covered him, warned him. While others ran from the bureau, Whitey partnered with it. And the FBI, they bought the lie because it delivered results. Bodies piled, the Italians fell, and Bulger rose higher than ever. It wasn't justice. It was collusion, dressed in a suit and a badge. With the Italians falling and the FBI looking the other way, Whitey built his throne in blood. He ran cocaine, extorted unions, rigged horse races. His enemies didn't die, they disappeared. He used the FBI files to pick them off before they struck. "It's like playing chess with the board lit up," he once joked. But it wasn't a game. It was a purge. His most loyal enforcer, Stevie Flemmi, handled the dirtiest work. Torture, dismemberment, acid baths. They cleaned Boston's streets with nightmares. And yet, the media barely touched him. He was a name whispered, a photo rarely seen. He didn't just evade the law, he became part of it. He was Boston's dark heartbeat, pulsing beneath every alley and office. But power always draws heat. Internal affairs sniffed around Connolly's office. A new generation of agents asked too many questions. Reporters chased whispers. But Whitey didn't panic. He adapted. He used fear to cloud the truth. Those who got close were reminded how flammable cars could be, how fragile bones were in stairwells. And Connolly? He doubled down. He erased files, threatened witnesses, took bribes like communion. He wasn't protecting a criminal, he was preserving a myth. Because Whitey wasn't just Southie's ghost anymore. He was the FBI's Frankenstein, and every page of the truth was soaked in federal ink. The system didn't just fail. It fed him. And then, Whitey vanished. No warning. No goodbyes. Just gone. One night he was Boston's Storm, the next, a ghost again. The FBI scrambled, but the truth was simple. Someone had tipped him off. Weeks before indictments, before headlines screamed betrayal, Whitey disappeared with millions. He left behind silence, empty safe houses, and a city blinking in disbelief. His enemies cheered. His allies panicked. And the FBI, they lied. They claimed they were closing in. But deep down they knew. They had built the perfect predator, and now he was loose. Somewhere, far from Southie, the devil was smiling. And no one knew where he'd strike next. He wasn't supposed to be a snitch. Not Whitey. Not the man who built his legend on silence. But the truth split wide open. Declassified memos, hidden transcripts, FBI records. It was all there. He had fed the Bureau names, secrets, bodies. The same man who butchered rivals was ratting out competitors. South Boston didn't know how to breathe. His old crew recoiled. He wasn't after money, one betrayed gangster muttered. He was after control. And the real betrayal? He hadn't just turned on enemies, he'd buried friends too. Names he shook hands with. Men who had stood beside him disappeared because he made the call. The myth collapsed in slow motion. The king wasn't just ruthless. He was a traitor cloaked in shadows. Stevie Flemmi was the first to snap. Dragged into court, he saw his world crumble under the weight of immunity deals and grand juries. He sat still as the names rolled out. People they'd buried, tortured, betrayed. He looked straight ahead when Whitey's name was read. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. But when the press asked him later if he felt betrayed, he whispered, Whitey was never loyal. He was just calculated. The brotherhood they claimed was nothing but camouflage. Flemmi went down with iron around his wrists, but he took Whitey's secrets with him. Until he didn't. Eventually, he talked. They all talked. The silence shattered, and behind every whispered detail was the echo of one truth. The devil was never who they thought he was. Billy Bulger stood at the podium, but his hands were shaking. Senate chambers held their breath. "Did you know?" they asked. Cameras zoomed. Journalists waited. And Billy? He didn't give them the fall. He gave them silence. "I don't believe Jim would do those things," he said flatly. But the damage was done. His legacy, once forged in policy and politics, was now stained by his brother's ghost. Protesters screamed outside. Headlines bled across papers. Bulger brothers, two sides of a lie. He resigned quietly. The golden boy of Southie walked out of the Capitol a shadow of himself. He never said if he knew. Maybe he didn't have to. Maybe blood tells its own story. Connolly fell next. The golden agent. The Southie kid who climbed too close to the fire. They tried to protect him. They tried to erase it. But the evidence came in waves. Bribes, warnings, obstruction. The court called him compromised. The city called him corrupted. Connolly claimed he was loyal to the mission, to his hometown. But loyalty to a monster is just complicity in slow motion. As he was led away in cuffs, reporters shouted his name. He didn't respond. He looked straight ahead, eyes blank, dreams long dead. Somewhere, Whitey was watching. Maybe even laughing. The man who once promised justice now wore a number, not a badge. The informant files weren't just evidence. They were confessionals. Page after page, blood turned into ink. Dozens of people dead. Dozens more silenced. And behind every name a note. Whitey knew them, helped end them. Victims' families read the reports with shaking hands. One mother stared at the words and whispered, "He smiled at my son." Others screamed in courtrooms. Some just cried. The truth wasn't clean. It was rotted, soaked in complicity and shadows. Whitey hadn't just evaded justice, he had twisted it into a weapon. The devil they feared was real. But worse, he was protected. And now the whole city had to admit. Boston didn't just lose its soul. It had signed it away. The indictments hit like thunder. 49 counts. And 19 murders. Extortion. Racketeering. Conspiracy. The courtroom was a battlefield of ghosts. Families cried. Agents stared down at the floor. Every name on the indictment was a crack in the illusion. But Whitey wasn't there. His seat was empty. They called his name. Silence answered. He had vanished. A week before the raids he disappeared like smoke. The FBI blamed miscommunication. Locals blamed corruption. But the streets knew the truth. Someone warned him. Someone in a suit. Someone with a badge. Justice had knocked. But the devil had already slipped out the back door, whistling in the dark. Whitey's escape wasn't panicked, it was surgical. He left no digital trail. No credit cards. No fingerprints. He vanished with Catherine Greig, his lover, into the folds of the country. The FBI plastered his face across billboards and airports. The most wanted man in America. But he might as well have been a ghost. He changed cars, changed cities, changed names. Cash in duffel bags. Fake IDs. Burner phones. They said he wore disguises, dyed hair, false teeth, surgical tweaks. But the real disguise was his calm. He didn't run like a fugitive. He walked like a man who had planned this moment for years. And behind him, Boston burned with shame. His former allies cracked under pressure. Kevin Weeks flipped. Flemmy gave interviews. Old killers spilled secrets for deals. The Winter Hill gang wasn't just crumbling, it was rotting. Safe houses were exposed. Burial grounds were unearthed. A user in Quincy. A basement in Dorchester. Every time a body was found, the press printed one name. Whitey. But justice wasn't just chasing him. It was chasing itself. Agents who once protected him now pleaded innocence. A federal agency scrambled to erase its shame. But the blood couldn't be mopped up. It stained too deep. Every confession was another nail in the myth. And yet, he stayed hidden. Because Whitey knew chaos was his greatest camouflage. For 16 years the world looked for him. Sightings in London, whispers in Mexico, rumors in Louisiana, but no one could hold the scent. He became a legend again, a story parents told to explain the evil in silence. Meanwhile, victims' families aged. Some died before hearing the truth. The city tried to forget. New mayors, new laws, new crimes. But Whitey's shadow stretched long. Murals were painted over. Bars changed names. But in Southie, some still flinched when headlights swept through alleys. Because deep down they feared he hadn't left. Just waited. Me. The king without a throne. The devil without chains. Then, a rent check changed everything. Santa Monica. A beachfront apartment. Routine, landlord inspection. Inside, stacks of cash, fake IDs, and a man in his 80s reading quietly. James, Whitey Bulger, arrested without a fight. No last stand. No blaze of glory. Just cuffs and silence. Catherine Greig cried. Whitey just smirked. It didn't end like a movie. It ended like paperwork. But the streets? They felt the quake. The devil was caught. After decades, ghosts had a face again. Reporters screamed. Helicopters circled. But he didn't blink. As if even in chains, he still held the cards. As if this too had been part of the plan. Whitey stood in the courtroom, not as a myth, but as an old man. Stooped, silent, and utterly unrepentant. 76 years old, 2 eyes like frostbite. The families of his victims sat behind him. Some wept. Some stared. A woman shouted, "Look at me!" He didn't. The judge read the charges. 19 murders. Decades of terror. Whitey showed no emotion. No apology. He didn't plead for mercy. He didn't deny. He just sat there, hands folded, as if watching someone else's life burn. For him, the trial wasn't punishment. It was theater. And in the end, he got life, plus 5 full. As if numbers could ever measure the weight of his crimes. Outside the courthouse, chaos bloomed. Reporters shouted. Protesters screamed. Some clutched photos of the dead. Others held signs that read, "Justice too late." But justice didn't walk out that day, just a sentence wrapped in headlines. Catherine Greig was convicted too. 8 years for hiding him. She cried. Whitey didn't. He told the press nothing. Not one secret. Not one regret. He walked into prison like a man going home. But the world had moved on. Southie had changed. The streets had grown up. Kids didn't know his name. And yet, he lingered. In the corners. In the memories. In the way mothers still checked the locks twice. Inside prison, Whitey was a relic. Inmates whispered. Guards watched. But he wasn't feared anymore. He was studied, like a dying breed. He kept to himself. Read books. Wrote letters. Bragged about outsmarting the system. To some, he was a symbol of defiance. To others, just another murderer rotting behind bars. But, even in prison, he played the long game. He kept secrets locked behind smirks. He filed complaints. Threatened lawsuits. Wore his sentence like a badge. Still the puppet master. Still the showman. But the walls didn't care. The steel didn't flinch. And time, at last, stopped listening. Then came the transfer. A quiet relocation to a West Virginia prison. No headlines. No press. Just an aging killer tucked into a new cage. But on his first night there, something changed. Inmates who had waited years for revenge finally got their moment. They entered his cell before sunrise. Beat him until his face caved in. Gouged his eyes. crushed his skull. When guards found him, he was unrecognizable. Whitey Bulger, the butcher of Boston, had been reduced to pulp and silence. No warnings. No goodbyes. Just steel, vengeance, and bone. The devil, it turned out, didn't die in fire. He died in the dark. There was no funeral. No eulogies. No public mourning. His ashes were scattered, his name spat rather than spoken. But the damage remained. Families still grieved. Boston still remembered. Not the man, but the fear he built. The way silence had ruled. The way trust had failed. Whitey didn't just break laws, he broke people. And in the end, even death didn't cleanse him. His story became a warning. A wound. A whispered curse. In the back rooms of Southie bars, old men still say, he got what was coming. And maybe he did. But others say he won. Because even now, people still tell his story. And that's how devils live forever. The news of his death didn't shock Boston, it silenced it. People didn't cheer. They stared at their screens. Whitey Bulger, once the city's most feared shadow, now reduced to pulp in a prison cell. The devil had died, not in glory, but in filth. No bulletproof vest. No escape. Just a body on the floor, eyes gouged, teeth shattered, skull caved in. He got what he gave, one ex-cop muttered. The man who spent a lifetime controlling fate met an end he couldn't script. And in the silence that followed, something unsettling crept in. Not justice, not peace, but something colder. Closure isn't always relief. Sometimes, it's just a quiet, terrible full stop. His funeral was an afterthought. No priests. No flags. Just a box. Cremated. Unmated. Unmarked. His ashes handled by lawyers, not mourners. No family claimed him. Billy didn't speak. Catherine Greig was barred from attending. Uneasy. Reporters circled like vultures, but there was no story left to take. His ashes were scattered somewhere off the coast. Location sealed. Witnesses sworn to secrecy. He left no will. No confession. Just headlines and history books. The man who once ruled Southie died nameless to the sea. The ocean didn't care. The wind didn't pause. And in the emptiness, one truth echoed. Not every death earns memory. Some just erase it. South Boston kept moving. Coffee shops replaced corners. Condos stood where bodies once did. Kids skateboarded past the old bar where Winter Hill soldiers once plotted. But in the cracks of the city, Whitey lingered. His name scraped into old benches. His mugshot yellowed in police archives. Mothers still paused at curbs after dark. His ghost didn't need candles or plaques. It lived in instinct. In the stories not told. In the silence that still followed the word, Bulger. Southie didn't honor him. It didn't forget him either. He became a myth without mercy, a lesson for those who believed monsters wore masks. They don't. Sometimes they wear smiles. FBI files on Whitey were sealed, then leaked, then redacted. Books were written. Movies made. He became pop culture's favorite villain. But beneath the scripts and spotlights lay something colder, complicity. He hadn't just evaded justice. He'd partnered with it. He weaponized law, manipulated agents, laughed in the face of process. His greatest crime wasn't murder. It was manipulation. The system bent to him, and then denied it. His ghost haunted not just Southie, but every office that stamped those files. In the end, Whitey wasn't a failure of morality. He was proof that power, when left unchecked, becomes its own religion. They say there's no retirement plan for ghosts. Whitey didn't die old. He didn't die rich. He died hunted, hated, and hollow. But he got what most killers don't. An audience. And maybe that's what he wanted all along. Not to win, not to survive, but to be remembered. Fear is louder than love. And for decades, his was the loudest voice in Boston. Now, only whispers. But they still echo. In courtrooms, in alleys, in the cold silence between headlines. Somewhere, a young thug will hear the name Bulger and grin. Somewhere else, a mother will shut her window early. Legends don't die. They fade. And sometimes they wait.